Welcome to another episode of HolmFront Reviews. We're going to be going over Star Wars and Rogue One. Welcome to the HolmFront. This is not Hello, welcome to this is Tuesday. This is not the weekend.
Welcome
welcome.
to early in the week.
So
Welcome to after the weekend.
this is after the weekend or before the weekend, depending on how you look at it. I mean, look forward to the weekend as soon as the week starts for some of us. So we just watched a movie. What did we watch?
We watched Star Wars Rogue One. So it's
Rogue
another
One.
Star Wars
As if the
movie.
intro didn't tell you what it was.
Yeah.
So we watched one of the most well-revered Star Wars films after the Disney takeover.
Is it revered?
It's pretty well regarded within the Star Wars community.
Well, it's well appreciated. I guess I would say that. Yeah.
We'll call it revered according to Disney standards. So
Okay.
you and I have some differing opinion on this film.
We do.
Yeah. In that I like it more than you do. I think it's not necessarily a huge disagreement.
But I did appreciate it more the second time viewing. The first time I liked it, but it just felt like it was okay. So we got to address.
Well,
the
is this
elephant
your
in the
only?
room.
Is this your second time?
Yeah, this is my second
Second
viewing.
time. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
You've seen it a number of times, right?
This is probably like fourth or fifth time. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so let's address the biggest elephant in the room, and that's the whole production of this movie, because I maintain that that's a big reason why I don't like it as much.
Production. Okay.
So they originally were like, apparently.
Oh, you're talking about pre-film. Okay.
Yeah, the report was that they showed a version of this movie to the Disney executives, and they were like, just doesn't have that Star Wars feel. And so they made them go back and reshoot. It was something like 96%. I'm not even exaggerating the number. Maybe it was just the filmmakers felt like it was that much, but still, they requested a massive overhaul of the movie, and that just really rubbed me the wrong way. It's because I was like, what was so awful about this movie? Like, it's the same people. You hired them. Why didn't you just accept what they had done? I understand if you want to change, like, maybe in a 20% range, like, oh, well, this doesn't work that well,
aren't there
or something.
a bunch of different factors that they take into account before they start filming? Like, you got to read the script, you got to approve the actors, you've got to be screening, as they're filming, right? You'd think. I mean, I don't know all the processes here, but
yeah, the lead producer should have been, okaying this stuff, but I'm sure that they were, and then the executives get to see it, and they're like, I don't know.
Well, the comment that I heard that was used was that it was too warlike.
Yes.
And I don't know how familiar you are with Star Wars, but there's two words in the title.
Oh, is there?
There's two. Yeah, one of which is wars. So it's odd that
interesting.
any of them would be too warlike.
Star Wars. Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right? And I thought when I heard about all this, there was multiple disappointments from us before this movie came out. So the first and foremost, the main one, and this will be an ongoing theme of this show forever, ad infinitum, is that there was a composer that was hired and officially did music for this film. And it's one of our favorite composers. His name is Alexander Desplat. He does the Harry Potter last two films.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant composer.
Along with whole bunch of other movies. He's done a lot of great stuff.
He's a brilliant guy.
He did Argo, Zero Dark 30.
Yep.
What was that Wes Anderson movie, The Grand Budapest Hotel? That was him.
I've not heard
Fantastic Mr. Fox. I think that was him as well.
Okay.
So he's done a lot of stuff. He's a really great composer. But basically, the reason why he's so significant to this whole piece is that the trailer for this movie, which was a rare instance of actually good trailers.
To be fair, it was a teaser.
Teaser,
it was a teaser, yeah.
But they had communicated this idea that it was going to be like an espionage Star Wars movie, and I thought, well, that's really interesting.
Sure.
You're going to take that angle with it. And Desplat, whose music is a little bit less in your face than something like John Williams, or who they ended up going with, Michael Giacchino, if I'm saying his name right. But
I don't think anyone knows how to say it. It's like Giacchino or Giacchino or something like that.
Something like that. But anyways, Desplat, I was like, he could do a suspense score. Like, he can do kind of like underlying tension. So I was really looking forward to the combination. And then they were like, no, go back, make it more conventional, make it more stereotypical, cut out all this unique crap. And then because they had to do that, it not only ruined kind of the vision they had, but it also meant they couldn't use Desplat because now it's a scheduling conflict.
Right.
So they had to
Yeah,
get
he did the
somebody
whole
else
thing,
in.
and then they're like, all right, you got to redo this all. And he's like, well, I ain't got time for that. I got a bunch
Right.
of other big movies I got to do.
I don't understand why, if he wrote all the music, why they couldn't just get someone to like implement his music to the visuals, if that's all that was needed.
I mean, unless Giacchino had inspirations. We'll never know because we will never hear that. But I mean, Mike Giacchino, he's not an unaccomplished composer. I mean, he's done like Incredibles, and he's done.
That's his best work, in my view, is The Incredibles.
No, it's not. It's not. What are you talking about? Get out of here. No,
What
Batman is easily his best work.
Which Batman did he do?
The Batman. The latest one.
Oh,
that's
the
him.
new one, the
Yeah.
Robert Pattinson one. Okay,
Robert
that
Pattinson.
one was good too.
Yeah.
For some reason, I was thinking of
Easily the best.
the Danny Elfman one, but
No,
Yeah.
even though that theme is forever embodied in Batman culture. Anyway,
yeah, Batman
Giacchino,
and Incredibles.
he has. I mean, and he does a decent job with the film.
Yeah. Especially in the latter half. But the
Yes.
first half, he's just got these moments where he's like, I got to pretend I'm John Williams. And it's like, calm down. It's
chill
not
out.
that exciting.
I mean, to be fair, like he probably didn't have a huge timeline to do all this, considering what they did. And
I feel like it shows. And I feel like he's
unfortunately, yeah, that's fair.
Okay, let me just get something and go. Because, yeah, I mean, you're doing a Star Wars score. That's a lot of work.
And this, like I said, I've always said this on the show, is that I try my best to just evaluate the film
Now that it's here.
as it exists. The thing
Yeah.
about a lot of these special instances is that so much of the problems behind the scenes bleed through. Right, and this
especially when
one-
we're talking about movies,
Right.
or video games. I
And
think
Disney
also.
Star Wars seems to suffer so much from this. Like we talked about this with the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
And it happened again with like Solo. And I mean, we'll probably do another video on that one too, just because of how
Oh gosh,
that
I gotta
one
sit
is
through that.
such an awful, awful film. But the thing is, it seemed like this was a consistent problem.
Yeah.
Is that it continuously, they went through so much, like large reshoots. Like they weren't
Yeah.
a scene or two. It was like large segments of the film. And this one suffered quite a bit of that. And you
Yeah.
can tell, like you even mentioned, and I wonder if that was correct, was that Forrest Whitaker shows up and he looks a little off. Like something looks a little wrong. It's almost
Yeah.
like they refilmed his scene without the set. Like they threw him in front
Yeah.
of a green screen or something.
Yeah.
It's just, there's certain things like that that are real weird looking. And there's a lot of creative decisions that were strange in this movie. Anyway, to keep this fairly succinct, what are your initial thoughts? Like, what'd you like about the movie? Let's start there.
Well, let me just kind of address. I want that elephant kind of taped down because I don't want to keep harping back to it.
Okay.
Because my final point with that is that in knowing that, or knowing all the catastrophe in the background of the production of the movie, when I sat down to see it in the theater, it was hard to not see that bleeding through, like you're saying. Because, like, yes,
So if you had not known about that, do you think you'd still notice?
I would still notice, but I wouldn't be able to pin down the reason. And
Okay.
now it just feels like I have a
So
scapegoat.
you were just able
for-
to understand why what you were seeing on screen was happening.
Yeah,
Okay,
because one
gotcha.
of my big problems is like the main character, her narrative arc, there's like this huge gap of like, it's like they do the first half of the movie, they do the second half, but in between those two, there's a really important middle portion of the film where things need to slow down and we need to build character development.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have any room to do that. And so then it's like almost like the character flips on a dime and he has one scene to accomplish everything that's supposed to.
You're talking about the director.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
director. He has to flip everybody's motivations and be like, well, they've all gone through their narrative arc now. It's done. And you're like, I guess so. Because
Which
he
is
doesn't-
something that you really like, is when a character transforms and so
Well,
on.
yeah.
Which,
and
if we're going to compare, Walking Dead does that, where there's
Yeah.
a scene in there where multiple characters shift.
Yeah, but I mean, I would even bring this into a Star Wars context. I mean, I feel like Luke's transformation in all three of the original trilogy is really handled very well.
That's fair.
Even though Empire is a very fast-paced movie too, it does, like, whenever it goes back to Luke, it kind of slows things down a bit. It cranks it, and then it goes, okay.
So you're saying it
we have
doesn't
to
slow
focus
down in
now.
the necessary moments with this film.
Yeah, it
Gotcha.
has a really, really hard time doing that. So that's kind of my big negative because, And I almost feel like, and like and internalizing, like, okay, this doesn't feel like a decision they wanted to make. It just feels like corporate intervention.
Feels like a decision they had to make.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. And this is very much a corporate thing because I'm sure it's true of many films, but like Disney seems to be like strangling their artists. They're doing the Darth Vader thing, which is like kind of ironic.
It
But
is.
okay, so what did I
Well,
like
I mean,
about the
Disney
film?
is often viewed as the empire at this point. The,
Pretty
the,
much.
I find it interesting that like Star Wars started as such an artistic endeavor, right? It was such an
Yeah,
ambitious endeavor, and now that it has become essentially franchised,
yeah.
at what point does that artistic merit stop bleeding through, right? Because
Right, right.
an artistic heart can only beat so long before
It just feels
it's
like it's
just
been
right,
sterilized
it's been
by
squeezed to death, like it's now bloodless. It
yeah,
almost feels like this was sort of the beginning. Like Rogue One is definitely the one that shines amongst the endeavors of Star Wars or
yeah,
Disney within Star Wars. But it definitely starts to show where all of the inspiration and influence that Lucas directly has starts to fade away.
yeah.
Because this one really harkens back and does its best to like close some gaps and
Hmm.
it sits within the realm of the films that came before it. But like as they start to move away further and further, the more they fail to resemble what it started as. Anyway, go ahead. So what did
Yeah.
you like? Sorry.
Yeah. So, well, no, actually, that's a good point because this movie positions itself in a very interesting way because it is a prequel to A New Hope.
Yeah.
But unlike the trilogy of prequels, it happens like right before New
Right.
Hope begins. Like this movie ends and then New Hope begins with literally like, a 5-minute interval between the two
Yeah, there
films.
might be like a day or something,
At
and that's
best,
about it.
because I mean,
Yeah.
they're in the middle of being hunted down. So yeah, I felt like that was kind of cool to like the way they tied that into it is really nice. And I
Yeah.
actually like the focus of the script. Like the plotting is actually pretty good. Like even though it does have this sort of Abrams thing where you go to a location and then at that location a bunch of people die and a bunch of fighting and explosions happen and then we leave. But this one feels more justified because it's more like, I mean, they're trying to get this intense like ragtag group who are just fighting to, it's like, oh, we're the rebels and we're losing and it's just terrible. It's sort of like just like in Halo where they made that spin-off game ODST where you weren't playing as the Master Chief anymore. So that meant you were just a Marine and that meant you were super weak and you felt it. You were just like, everything hurts. Everything's going to kill me. I need to like get health packs and stuff again. I can't jump super high because I'm not a super soldier anymore. So this kind of feels like that, where it's like you don't have a Jedi, you don't have like a main cast. It's like they're just here for one movie. So it's all kind of like it's like the Empire feels like a real threat.
Hmm.
So that part is good.
That is refreshing. It is
Yeah.
similar to, well, I would say it's opposite to Romulus in the fact that the characters actually feel like characters at least. Like they
Yeah.
do
Yeah, they
flesh them
do.
out to some level rather than just being like, well,
Well, they
they're all
have
gonna die anyway. Yeah,
personality.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas Romulus seemed to fail on that front too much. They
Yeah.
had enough to like, all right, cool. It feels like a human being. This one actually feels
Yeah.
like a character.
They slipped into stereotypes of like, oh, well, here's the jerk character who
Right.
you just want to see get killed
And
later
he's
on in the
going to,
movie, and
like
he's
he's gonna
going
pay it
to.
off.
Yeah.
Whereas as this one, Rogue One, it feels like a lot more of like, oh man, I
Yeah.
wonder if they're all gonna make it, and none of them do, obviously. But spoilers.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to go along with that, I mean the characters are, see, it's like they're good in terms of them servicing the plot. They're not super deep in and of themselves. They feel like they could be deep.
Hmm.
And it feels like it's almost like he spends a long time in this movie with the end battle sequence and he actually handles that really well. It's a ton of different moving parts and it's cool to see like the intricacies of like the mission execution come out,
Sure.
but also like it is kind of at the expense in terms of runtime of like other elements in a story that I really like. So this movie feels like it's more about an experience than it is a story. I think that's where I'm settling with it now because it also has other things that it does that are nostalgic in a way that's refreshing and unique and not usually done. So like the big one of course is when the rebel ships come in and they're doing this ship battle, they're using footage that like unused footage from New Hope that they shot, and then it's like the cockpit shots of the pilots, and they're just like Rogue 5 reporting in or whatever, and they blend this in with some of their own characters, and that was kind of a cool way to kind of resuscitate and kind of honor New Hope, I felt. Which is like it's like, because I mean by and large this is not a movie that needs to exist. It's just like it's just a excuse to make a Star Wars movie.
Yeah,
But if
that's
you're
fair.
going to make it, you know what I mean, you might as well pay homages and you might as well try to tell a competent story. And I feel like they accomplished that.
Yeah. Yeah, because so often nostalgia is a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to pull off. Because at one point, when you delve too far into fan service, it
Yeah.
lessens its artistic value
Mhm.
intrinsically. Whereas if you don't do it right, then it feels like you didn't understand it in the first place, and therefore it falls flat.
Yeah.
This one actually feels like it did it pretty naturally. And the way they set up the battle, like it's a very impromptu thing. The rebels, the Rogue One crew, this ship manipulates this fight scene essentially where they go in and they're like, we're going to get the plans regardless of what the politics are behind it. We're just going to go do it. This is the right thing to do, so we're going to do it. And so they manipulate their friends into either, hey, you come help or you let us die. And so, they eventually make the right decision. They go to help. And because of that, they draw in a bunch of people from Yavin 4, which ends up being a lot of, the crew that helps Luke later in New Hope.
Yeah.
And so that was their justification for pulling in this old footage and being able to splice it in. And they made a really good job of mixing it and making it look like it belonged. It wasn't from a separate
it's super smooth.
time. Yeah, it looks great.
Mm-hmm.
And they did the dialogue really well. It was a really nice homage.
Yeah.
And it was a good way of integrating without pulling you out of the movie and be like, remember this? Like, member berries are really tough to pull off, and I'm not usually a fan of it, but I thought this one handled it really well.
Yeah,
the other one that they do, and because they do a couple of them, the other one I thought that did really well was the Vader scene at the end, because it was just kind of like I don't know, because that one they kind of just went ham. They're like, you know what if Vader comes through and just wipes a bunch of people out? And like you get delivered. Everybody wants to see that. There's not a single person that's ever seen Star Wars that doesn't want to see Vader go ham on a bunch of people. And like,
a bunch of rebel scum. He's always saying that.
Exactly.
Let's see him do it.
Rebel scum. And then he just like treats him like it. And it's like, all right, this is great.
They choreograph it well too. The way he's like slicing him up and then using the Force to like choke him and throw him out of the way.
Right.
Like it's perfect. It's
so
totally
contemptuous almost.
It's just like he's just methodically like tearing them apart. Just like literally slaughtering these guys, and they're like, like take the plans, and then he gets like stabbed through the door.
The great thing about it is that they follow a lot of tropes that have existed since the first film. Yeah, that they put them in this confined little hallway. There's nowhere to go.
Right.
They just know that this big looming dark force is coming, and they're all dead. They know that they're all dead before it happens. They just like hopelessly fighting.
It was a nice reaffirmation of like Vader is a scary character.
Yes, he is. Yeah, because that was the collective thought when he showed up on screen for the first time. Is that he just arrives after this battle, and he's this like, huge, imposing dark force, and like everything he does. It's just intimidating. The first thing he does with that character is just lift him off the ground with just his bare hands and cracks his neck and throws him against the wall. And he's like throwing around orders, and he just dictates this force. So first they establish how powerful the Empire is. Yeah. And then they establish that this guy's their leader, so he must be way more powerful. And then they just kind of systematically reinforce that. And this movie did nothing to diminish that at all. I think they give him a little bit too much screen time. They show him once before that scene in the hallway, and I thought it was an unnecessary scene. I thought it was just
when they go to Bowser's castle.
There's differing opinions on whether that's. I mean, he establishes his fortress in Mustafar where he's burned alive and such, and so like
it's like this lava fortress. Right. It's like a castle with like a lava pool of like lava streaming down.
It's a little evocative of Bowser's castle, to be fair. But he has this weird dialogue bout with Krennic, this main antagonist in the film, and he makes a stupid dad joke, which I was like, why? It's like, careful not to choke on your aspirations as he's
Yeah.
choking him. I'm like, oh man, you guys can't do this. Thankfully, they kept it to a minimum. With that type of humor, there is a
Yeah.
character in there specifically for comic relief, but it's very natural. They chose the character well, who's got good timing, and it's like the situation call for it.
Yeah.
It's very rarely out of place. Whereas the Vader one is like, okay,
Yeah, and that scene, it literally offers nothing to the story
it
or the
doesn't.
plot or the
Yeah.
characters. So it's
It's
just
just to be like, hey, look, Vader's here. And it's like, ah, man. So I was
yeah.
afraid that they were going to be doing too much of that member berry nostalgia
Mhm.
bait stuff. But again, they knew where to put it correctly. They also didn't hold back when they should have. So, and the most egregious, I think I'm going to use this to jump off. The most
Yeah.
egregious, and we've had this discussion. I think it's an interesting one to bring back up. Maybe we'll make it an entire episode on it one day. But just the artistic expression of where not to use an actor, right? Because like if I'm
Yeah.
jumping onto a scene and I have contracted on that, I'm being paid to do that, and like
Right.
it is me that's doing it, that's one
Mhm.
thing. If it's just my likeness that they're using in order to evoke a certain character, where's that line? When is it okay and when's it not okay?
Yeah.
And they do that twice here. The first one being Governor Tarkin, who
You mean General?
General Tarkin. I don't
Yeah.
think governor.
He's the governor.
Yeah, it's a guy mixing up Walking Dead. So Tarkin shows up and he's just a CGI face, and I was like, and don't
He
get me
shows
wrong.
up like 3 or 4 times too. It's like, dude.
Okay, so the first thing I'll mention is that there's a way to do this, and
Yeah.
I thought,
And they had the opportunity.
well, this is the problem the film suffers from, I think, the most. And I don't want to like attribute this to one person because I don't know how much corporate
Yeah.
involvement was there. Here's the thing. Less is more. So when you have a character that's as imposing and has a reputation like Tarkin's, it's okay to just put in just enough to affect the story
Yeah.
and then move on. So what they had was when he shows up, he's looking out at the Death Star as it's being made, and they have his
Yeah.
reflection. And I thought that's a great depiction of him. You don't need him to turn around.
Right,
Like
just have him talk his few couple lines through the mirror,
maybe
and
even
it's
one
like,
or two.
"Ooh, cool."
You maybe don't even need a line. Like it'd be even fine if he's just like standing there and their
Yeah.
discussions being had, and he's just kind of overseeing it, and he doesn't say anything.
Yeah,
That would also
yeah.
be interesting because he's got this imposing figure.
Mhm.
It's just odd that they made him so interactive. Because here's the thing:
Yeah.
the technology, look, is incredible. It
Yeah.
for what it is, it looks amazing. However, it's not there.
Right.
You can tell it's not the same. It's a
The
CGI
human
face,
eye knows.
and they keep putting him in way too brightly lit environments with too many faces to compare and contrast, and it just looks off.
Yeah.
And it's to its detriment, unfortunately. Like it's
Yeah.
he's such a great character, and they do such a great job recreating his face. Like it looks just like him. It's just enough
Mhm.
that like it's close. Anyway, so they do that there, and then they do Leia at the end, and it's brief. It's really brief. It's like almost negligible, but she turns around and it's like, man, we got who it was by the dress. I mean, she's wearing the white robe from New Hope. Like we understood who it was,
But you have to see
but you gotta
her.
see the face.
You gotta know
It's
for certain.
so all that aside. So there's my problems there. You mentioned last time with the sequel trilogy that
The use of Leia.
well, so there's the use of Leia, but there's also an interesting point you made where it's like you're taking away an opportunity from someone else who could portray this character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or taking away the spot of another person you could throw in. Like, at what point do you just be like, okay, we don't have this person anymore. Let's give someone else an opportunity to say, hey, you can step in and be some
Yeah.
kind of like, because people know. I mean, we know.
We all know
like,
that Peter
yeah.
Cushing has passed away.
Right. Same
So,
thing with
like,
Carrie Fisher. It's at certain
right.
points, like, it's all right to just.
I mean, look
know.
at like Harry Potter with
Right.
Dumbledore. The
Yeah.
actor who played him in the first 2 films, he passed away, and so what were they to do? Like resurrect him through AI? No, it's like
And they
you get
definitely
a
weren't
new
there
actor.
technology-wise, for sure.
And I like when when they got a new actor, he had a very different take on Dumbledore,
Yeah.
but it fit with the new direction they were going with the story because the storyline was maturing, and so it actually fit very well.
To be
So
fair, that does work in Harry Potter's favor, and there's very few stories that can pull that specific element off
I would
because,
argue this works fine here, though,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I mean, it's like it's a different time, or especially for Leia, because it's a different time. But I don't know. Go ahead. You were going to say because.
Well, it's Harry Potter specifically is trying to help you grow up with the character, and so he's going to see people differently than he did
So they looked at
initially. So
they look
yeah,
and
you
behave
can get
differently
away
because
with that kind of behavior, especially with Dumbledore, as
yeah.
influential as he is.
Mm-hmm.
This one, like, I understand why they do it, but at a certain point, you got to ask, like, did we need Tarkin in here? Like, did we
Yeah.
need Leia? Because we get the story, like, they're getting the plans to the Death Star. So, like, yeah, Leia's going to be involved. You send it over to the ship. We all recognize the ship. Like,
Yeah.
there's plenty there that we don't need these
Right.
things. And so it just, at what point do is too much, I guess, is
Yeah.
the question.
Yes.
Anyway.
So I'm with you there, and I still hold to. I wish they had just gotten an actor to play Grand Moff Tarkin.
Sure.
I'm sure there's tons of actors out there who would be like, heck yeah, I'm so thrilled and so honored to play,
Sure.
Peter Cushing's Grand Moff Tarkin character. Especially even if, and then I would just do a bit part. But the other thing is, I think it was sort of a missed opportunity because there needed to be more conversations, I think, between Krennic and, what is it, Matt Milksons or Milkinsons or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
What's his name? I'm totally
Well, Galen is the character in the show,
Galen,
but yeah,
yeah.
Mads something.
Yeah,
He's like,
Mads.
yeah, he's like Scandinavian actor or something.
I
Anyway,
can't pronounce his
it's a
last
very
name.
interesting name that he's
But
got.
he's a really competent. Both of those guys are really competent
Yes.
actors. So I'm like,
What's the other guy's name? I know his name is Krennic in the film, but
I don't know his
Anyway,
name, but
anyway.
he's Australian, I think, because his American accent, he puts that on.
his English accent is phenomenal too.
Yeah. So he's a really good actor too. So I
Yeah.
was like, dude, just put the two of them together, write them some good dialogue. You could see their kind of philosophical differences because, Krennic's character, he can't kill Galen, and he can only do so much because he has to get him to work for him.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, so it's sort of like, he's dependent on them on him, and he's making him dependent on him, and he's threatening him, but he can only threaten him with so many things because he's pretty much exhausted all those
That would have been an
possibilities.
interesting duality. Because the thing about Grand Moff Tarkin as well is that he tends to overshadow Krennic, and Krennic is a compelling character on his own.
Yeah,
Like, he really brought that character to life. He did a really good job, and so
Yeah.
it was almost a disservice to him as well to be like, well, we're going to put over this character who's going to steal the spotlight. Everyone knows Tarkin,
Right.
but not everyone knows Krennic, and so it'd be interesting if Krennic got some time to shine.
Yeah, why is it such a problem to just have a new character make it their
Sure.
story? And
it's totally fine if Tarkin like I said, if he shows up in the end or something, and he's the one that, like, kills Krennic or whatever,
Sure.
and then he's the one that takes over, because then he doesn't need any dialogue. He's just there because you know that he takes over the Death Star. Like, you get that.
Right.
Anyway, all that aside, I mean, what would you rate this film, like, on your star rating?
This is tough.
Just as it exists, like, eliminating all that could have been or would have been or should have been.
So I'd probably give it a 3-star.
Okay.
But if it was a percentages, I'd probably give it a good, like, I'd probably give it like 80%.
Oh, okay.
Because, like, it's in a weird space where it's mostly like a movie that Star Wars folks, like Star Wars fans, are gonna love.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's pretty competently put together.
Yeah.
Like I said, like the end execution with the, this espionage move and then this ensuing battle that shows up, which, by the way, I know a lot of people are like, oh, they're just fan service this up. Like, why are the AT-ATs there? And it's like, because they're on an Imperial station. So they would have AT-ATs just in stock. It's not like they built AT-ATs just to assault Hoth. They're like a produced unit that they use for various purposes.
Sure.
That the Hoth battle being one of them. So they just happened to be there on this beach base. So they deployed them because they were under attack. Makes sense to me. So I don't know. Like, I thought it was a very smooth way to get your fan service in there, and you got to see them in a different context. So I thought that was good. And the other scenes, the earlier stuff leading up to it, like the storyline, like the plot and like the beats that you hit, that's all good. That all flows pretty nicely. It's just kind of like it goes down to that 3-star range for me, just because I'm like, yeah, like you can enjoy it just as like the pure like structure of the movie is good, but it's just lacking a little bit of heart. Now, that's not to say it's not like true to Star Wars or the passion of Star Wars, like the inspiration of it, because they
Hmm,
clearly feel like fans and they really like infuse like fresh interest in Star Wars into this movie, but at the same time, like it sort of is at the cost of some necessary character development for
that's
me
fair. Yeah.
and some necessary like tension points, right? Because like mind you, we talked about like iRobot last time. You had mentioned that iRobot was not a deep film, but it had like enough to like
Yeah.
establish the tension and that there was a good character development throughout. And I would agree with that. And that would also be like a 3-star, 80% kind of
Yeah.
movie for me, where I'm like, it's not really like one that you're going to be like, oh, what a great film to go see. But also, like, this is a really solid picture. So I can't be too mad at it, you know?
Well, I appreciate because Star Wars, the original trilogy, does that as well. It is a very straightforward storyline,
Yeah.
but it has elements where it provides avenues for deeper thoughts, deeper questions.
Yeah.
iRobot's very capable of doing that too, or it does that.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's more than just what an average audience member will go in there and get something out of it, and then someone who wants something more will also get something from it. So it's a
Yeah.
good two-way, or it's a good
A middle ground movie
yeah, middle
or,
ground. There you go.
yeah.
And this one, it has some of that. Um, it's frustrating to know that something exists.
There's a
You know,
different version of this movie that's probably
right?
infinitely better. That is a 5-star movie, I'll
It
bet.
could be, yeah. I mean, it's something that like we'll never know, and that's what's
Yeah.
so frustrating about it. And I really, like I said, I try not to evaluate that just because I don't know what that is. But I also know that that intrinsically steals artistic merit because these corporate overlords get their fingers involved and like, well, we need this and this is going to get more butts and seats, or this is going to get more money, whatever it is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
their
yeah.
reasoning is,
Hmm.
and it takes away from the vision that the writers and the director had initially,
Yeah.
especially when you got to do reshoots and such. And like most movies are going to go through reshoots. I mean, for better or for worse. Like Lucas, for instance, had
Sure.
his wife going through and be like, no, these are all stupid decisions. These are taking away from what you're trying to say. But ultimately, the message remained the same,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So anyway, I mean, those are I guess if I were to raise it, it'd probably be, it's tough. I'd probably be in the 3 or 4 star range. Like, if I were to rate it in the percentage, probably like, I'd probably go with an 85. Just because, like, I
Hmm.
find this to be a really fun film.
It
It's,
is very fun. I
it's,
do want to talk about it because it feels like genuinely fun.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that. It's a breath of fresh air just to be like, it's not overcomplicated. It doesn't try to be more than it is. And it doesn't take away from any of the other narratives. Like, I even liked that they didn't do the opening crawl because they're like, this is just a kind of standalone spin-off film, and it's not
Mm.
like
Yeah.
it doesn't have to fully commit, and so it's just kind of a fun, like, it's one of those that you would think would be a Saturday morning kind of movie,
Yeah.
not part of this grander scheme. It's just this like fun little bit that you get to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I really liked that concept. I wish that they had kept with it. I mean, not the way that they did, but if they had kept with it in these types of films, not like going into the solo direction, but staying in this direction, where it
Yeah.
seemed like there was a lot of passionate people that really enjoyed working on this and making it.
Yeah.
It bled through. Like, despite all the problems that it has, it
Yeah.
bled through the passion and the fun that people were having making it. So, all that to say, that's what I liked about it, just in general.
Yeah, because there's enough integrity to just the it being a production, like the visuals looking really like authentically Star Wars, like New Hope.
Right.
But then, when they bring in the old footage, they're able to like seamlessly merge them together. It's like, wow, that looks great. And,
Yeah,
again,
honestly,
that kind of
if I
like,
didn't know, I would not have known that that was what they had done. If I didn't
yeah,
know that they put that old footage in there, I would have no clue.
yeah, yeah. It's just, it's so smooth. But, that shows like, because they had to make their production like match that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it comes across as so sincere, is they weren't like, well, let's take that old footage and then dress it up and make it all weird and different like what we're doing now. It's like, no, we have to look like this.
Mm.
It's in like 4K because it's going to be on a big,
Yeah, it's a modern day film in the
yeah.
theaters.
So we've got to scale up
Probably
the image
IMAX.
as best we can, but
Yeah.
otherwise it's what it looks like. Because they even have a shot where like a TIE fighter guy gets hit and then like he's in the cockpit and like the sparks come forward as he's blowing up. Because that's what happens like 15 times in New Hope.
Yes.
They're just like,
the fun thing about that particular scene is that it's Red 5, and so they're intentionally saying, all right, this is the position Luke takes in New Hope. I don't know if you knew that, but that's his call sign is Red 5, so they get this guy just dying in this comical fashion. He's like, I'm going down. Dies in classical fashion. Anyway, yeah, great fun with all that stuff. And that was another like fan service moment, because most people that know New Hope are going to recognize.
Yeah.
Because you can tell like Gold Leader's in there. And
yeah.
Anyway, so they show these guys, and like you're like, oh, I know those guys. How do they get those actors to look? Because they don't look like they're de-aged by CGI, and so it's because they're not. It's because they actually cleaned up that footage and made it fit into their style, and it was it was a nice homage.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those few moments where you get to see fan service the way that it should be, not the way that you keep seeing it these days, where it's like,
yeah,
stop
it feels
marketing back to better movies. Like it's hurting you.
Yeah.
Just rely on your own material.
And the constant pandering, and then it's like always going for some kind of political agenda.
Sure.
And the funny thing about all of it is that it's a rare instance of something just being like, it's just entertainment almost.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of depth there, which I want to talk about afterwards. But, a movie like Top Gun Maverick was so successful because its whole goal was to just be a throwback title that's just entertaining. And everybody saw that and was like, oh, what a breath of fresh air. What a nice, fun,
They've been
escapist
beaten over the
movie.
head so much, they're just like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, and it highlights how far things have been ingrained, and how much there has to be like a point and a message, and how much we have to try. And it's like, why are you trying so hard? Why aren't you just like having a very simple focus? Because there's a weird imbalance of scale in this movie that works really well. On the one hand, it's like we're simple entertainment, and on the other hand, it's like, well, this is like a big production values. And also, there is some interesting depth that they add to the larger canon of the lore. So that being, of course, the rebels are not necessarily as squeaky clean as you'd like to see. Because Andor, he straight up kills the informant he meets at the very beginning. Like, that's his introduction. So he gets the information from him, and then he kills him because he's afraid that he's going to get captured. And then he's going to spill his guts to the Empire, and he can't have that. And so that was like oh, that's a dark edge. And then, later on, the rebels tell him, like, look, if you find Jen Erso's dad, like, just kill him. Like, because he's too dangerous.
He's building the Death Star, so why would we trust him?
It's great if we could bring him back, but that's not likely, so just kill him.
Sure.
And so they had this kind of brutal, like, this is like terrorist level logic here, but, they're being strangled out of existence. So, like, if we don't stay alive, if we don't make sacrifices, then that's going to be the end of us, and the Empire will reign forever. So, I like, that's their kind of logic that was always there, but could never really be explored because, the original trilogy was focused more on the characters and the overall, like, sentimental story.
Right. Well, yeah, these are the ones that pave the pathway to someone like Luke, who can come in and actually, deal the final blow, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And he's able to maintain his purity, whereas these guys had to get their hands dirty a little bit more.
Yeah.
They had to be further down in the muck and mire in order for someone to stand. Anyway, it does.
I could see why that bothered Disney because it is different, but it's like,
I mean, it's what they should have done with the sequel trilogy, like morally gray. I mean, they had the opportunity.
Well, isn't that more?
They opened the door, then they're just like, I'm not going in there. Like, well, then why'd you open it?
Well, yeah, because like, isn't like morally gray, complicated characters and, characters who you thought were good are not anymore, and screw the system.
Right.
I mean, that's all like our contemporary entertainment now.
Sure.
So like, why didn't you just do that? Instead, they were like, just make it just like the originals, just like
paint by numbers,
copy
baby.
and paste and ignore all the like meaningful significance of it. And it's like, okay, now it didn't work for anybody.
Right. Yeah, when you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one.
Yeah.
And I think this movie did a good job of making sure that it knew its audience as much as it could,
Yeah.
as much as it was allowed to please
As much
its
as
audience.
it was allowed.
Again,
Yeah.
I'm trying to like temper just
Mhm.
because of what I know happened behind the scenes, even though I try not
Yeah.
to factor that into, because it is an artistic endeavor and that should be based on, what it is that you get to experience at the end of it,
Mhm.
regardless of why it was created the way it was. Anyway, do you have any final thoughts? Do you have anything you thoroughly disliked about the film?
No, I mean, we already talked about like the AI usage and
Yeah.
stuff. Like, yeah, everything else I think is solid. One thing that I think it harkens to though, and I like to make this comparison with Nintendo a lot, because Nintendo is very interesting in that they're extremely protective over their IPs too. Like back in was it the early 90s when they were making the Donkey Kong Country games, they gave that license to Rare, which is a British studio, and they had to do a new design for Donkey Kong because now he was going to be in his own game, and he was going to be the lead and he was going to be the hero. And so when they did a design for it, Nintendo didn't like it, and they said they had constant battles with Nintendo over the design of Donkey Kong because they were like, he needs to look like this.
Sure.
And they felt like, Rare was disrespecting the character, and eventually they got them to relent. And now Donkey Kong looks the way that Rare designed him.
With the tie and all
Yeah, with the tie and like how he has like the unibrow basically, and it just kind of
that.
punctures down to get like his particular look. It's something, or it's not his eyebrow. It's just like
The crease on
the crease on his forehead. Yeah, it was a trick that they used for the Battletoads characters, which was the game they had made before this.
Okay.
And so they
Gotcha.
just applied that to Donkey Kong, and they eventually got Nintendo to relent. But Nintendo, despite having so much control over how their character has to look, they do have a lot of freedom in how that character can exist. So you look at Donkey Kong, you look at Mario, you look at Kirby, they'll use them in all sorts of games. So it's not just like, Mario Kart, it's Mario Party, it's Super Mario World,
Right.
it's Mario this, Mario that. And so he can take all these different formats, and it makes the brand more like
Universal?
multifaceted.
Yeah. Yep.
And I just kind of wish Disney had thought of that. And I don't know why they didn't. If I was them, I would have been like, look, we want to do a Star Wars movie every year. We're going to burn out the audience very quickly, and we're just going to be like, throwing money down the drain at some point. So from the get-go, I would have said, okay, you have episodes 7, 8, 9. I want them to be kind of conventional Star Wars movies in the sense of like
just reestablishing your foundation.
yeah. And I want it to be kind of the soap opera thing. I want it to be about like family lineages. I want there to be a storyline that connects all three of them into one cohesive picture. I want all that good stuff, right? That's what I would have done. And I would have been all over that script. I would have been that authoritative, very annoying executive who said, like, no, I know Star Wars better than you do. And I would have vetted people, but like, no, you're not good enough. I would have been all over it. But then for Rogue One, I would have been like, yeah, do whatever you want. Because I would have been like, look, like, I want variety now. I want it to be like a war
Gotcha.
movie because I'm doing something over here that's going to be conventional. So you go over there and you do something different. Like, and if it succeeds or fails, doesn't matter. I've got this as the core solid pick.
Gotcha.
And then we got our wild card to change things up. And then I would just intersperse different wild cards for different ideas. Like I would have signed on someone to do.
So it's almost like an anthology, a disconnected anthology. So
Yeah.
make it however you like. You just got to have standards of like, no chopping people's heads off and blood and gore. And,
I would
it's
just say
different.
like it needs to be like a PG, or if
Yeah.
you want a PG-13 rating, let me know and give me a good reason why.
Sure.
Otherwise, I'd like to keep it like PG if you can.
That's fair.
I think most of the Star Wars movies. There's oh wait a minute. I think it's I think just Revenge of the Sith is PG-13. That one is.
I think Last Jedi is also PG-13 if I'm not mistaken. And then Rogue One.
I meant of the originals, but yeah.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah. It's
Rogue One is PG-13 for sure. It has to be. There's
Is it
a lot of shooting.
dark content.
Yeah, and like characters dying and
Yeah,
you know.
it gets a little dark.
Mhm.
I mean, reasonably so. It's definitely not over the top. It's
Yeah.
palatable.
But imagine that then, because if somebody wanted to do like an Old Republic film, I'd be like, okay,
Don't give them ideas. They're
that'd
already
be cool.
ruining everything else.
If someone wanted to do like one of the Timothy Zahn books, I've been like, go for it. Sounds
They've
good.
already ruined all his characters too.
Anyways, I just like to bring that up because it's like it's a broader subject about like how to treat IPs, because once it's an intellectual property, now it has sequels and iterations and revisions and updates and remakes and remasters, and it starts to go into all these other territories, sequels and prequels and you know, and I feel like that makes it a much more complicated puzzle. And I feel like with a
Gotcha.
property like Star Wars, I'm like, look, this is coming with some baggage and a lot of passion.
Yeah.
So
Passion created the baggage, some would say. It's or vice versa. Whatever.
you might say.
It's some would say.
Yeah, do you have anything else? Because I know this is a film that you've wanted to talk about for a while on the show.
I think we covered a lot of good points. No, I love this movie. I think it was the direction I thought Star Wars I thought Star Wars was going to continue in, and unfortunately did not. I will say the spin-off show that it inspired, Andor,
Yeah, that's not so bad. That's pretty good.
it's rather compelling. Definitely really good writing in that show, and so it's yeah. I mean, of all the Disney Star Wars content, like those are the two that actually stand out, and so it's stuff that I would actually revisit.
Yeah.
And so this one was nice because it was like it's something that it made me appreciate Gareth Edwards. Like, despite what
Yeah.
problems you may have with him, he was a competent film, and it really felt like he was just having fun with it. It was just
He was a pretty good choice for this one in particular.
Yes.
I think the script was more focused,
Yeah.
and I think his aptitude and background in visual effects really helped him use the old footage and get everything to look really
it is
nice.
a really good looking film as well. Just
Yeah.
in general, it's a really nice looking film,
Mm-hmm.
and it has a lot of charm that I specifically look for. Like in the first scene when they fly in and they find Galen. They live in this, I don't know, this hut type thing, and it's very reminiscent of where Luke lives in New Hope,
Uh-huh.
but it's not in a desert planet, thank God. But I love the like technology that they've got there, the water moisturator or evaporators, whatever it is that they've got out there.
Mm-hmm.
The screens that they use, they're kind of like concave. It's
Yeah.
very reminiscent of a classic retro style while
Uh-huh.
looking kind of modernized.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think it's so charming. Alien Romulus did it. It's very, very reminiscent of that retro style.
Yeah.
It's very, I don't know, it makes you feel, it's just comfort, I guess. It
Yeah.
feels like homely. It feels very lived in. It feels very, I just love the look of it. The
Well,
style
because
is
it
charming.
captures the same reasons that Lucas had, where he said this is supposed to feel like a lived-in world.
Right.
So things feel like they've been around a while. You're constantly like, like it's like spare parts and scrap.
Yeah, everything's kind of duct taped together. And
Yeah, yeah.
barely held up.
It's not this futuristic society where everything is one color,
Mhm.
and everything has been refined to perfection. No, instead it's just a lot messier. It's like you're in a junkyard the whole time.
Right.
And this kind of recaptures some of that essence. But then they use the Imperial really well. They have them come in and really make a presence, and then they
Yep.
start to. It's like you kind of feel that oppressive force that these characters feel. It's not that like because from Luke's perspective when we first meet him, I mean he wants to join up with the Empire. It doesn't like it's not like the Empire comes by
He wants
every
to
other
join up
afternoon.
with the rebellion.
No, he wants to join the Empire when it starts. He wants to be a fighter pilot. Yeah, that's what he tells Obi-Wan.
In the rebellion, he wants to be a rebellion pilot.
No, not for.
He does. I'll show you later.
I don't think so. It's
You're
like no,
incorrect.
he's like I'm gonna be a fighter pilot.
Yeah, in the rebellion.
He doesn't want to be a part of the rebellion though, because
He does.
he rejects it.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah, he rejects it because he's like I'm too old for this, and he's like, look, I could take you as far as Mos Eisley.
We'll watch it later.
We're
I'll
gonna
show you.
argue about
I'll
this
prove
more
you
off
later.
screen.
Either way, yes. I mean, it's It is very reminiscent of all that stuff. It's charming. It's fun. It harkens back to a time where it was less politicized and I don't know, less diluted, I guess. Because this is the second film that Disney made. So
Yeah.
they were only 2 in before, they
Hmm.
had 6 other movies, 12 other shows. Just didn't get buried with everything else.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, anyway, we're
So
going a little bit long, but is there anything else that you want to jump in with?
no, I just wanted to ask. So,
Yeah.
like, this is the film that you appreciated. And when you say that you found this one as like a breath of fresh air, like, do you feel like this movie had enough depth that if they had just done the sequel trilogy like this movie, you would have been satisfied? Do you think?
Define like this movie. Because here's the thing about Rogue One. It's great as a standalone film,
Yeah.
and it doesn't try to be anything else. And so it doesn't really work to compare against something that they're trying to franchise,
Well,
or
what
at
if
least trying to put a sequel to.
well, if they were doing like 7, 8, 9,
Yeah.
like just in this style visually,
Okay.
and with the same, I guess, amount of substance, definitely not more. Like this has a little bit, but not a ton, right? But like that same level of
Uh
substance
huh.
carries through, and then obviously they would have a more focused character, and then they just did a trilogy of movies around that character and that main cast. And so the storyline wouldn't be like the tragedy that these characters go through. It would just be like you'd have your main cast, they go through adventures for 3 movies.
I think I would use the show format for that if I were going to do that, because that's very episodic. I mean, that sounds more like Star Trek kind of a thing.
You don't think it would be like enough like operatic drama to make for a 3 trilogy of movies?
No, that
That's
sounds
fair.
like a Firefly idea.
Well, because it's like it's fun, and that somehow scales it back, doesn't it? And makes it the context a little different.
Yeah, well, because okay, so yeah, the way that I look at that, I mean, the way you're asking me, at least the way I'm interpreting it, Firefly exists within a very similar type universe, right?
Yeah.
Where something bigger is going on and they're just surviving in a small way.
Mm-hmm.
Rogue One is doing kind of something similar, even though it's kind of
Yes.
tapping into the larger scale.
Yeah.
Whereas Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, is like, no, they're affecting directly the larger scale of things.
Yes.
And so it just depends on what you're trying to do with that. If I were Disney, what I would have done, kind of in a similar vein, I would not have done 789. Here's the thing: that saga is done.
Okay.
Unless you're going to be really ambitious with it, in which case I would have had like a Jedi temple, which Luke is like the head of, and he has like his own order started and
Yeah, I'd have done
his
that
own
too.
philosophy and stuff. Like if I'm going to do that, then I would have done 7, 8, and 9.
Yeah.
The way that they did 7, 8, 9, like it just doesn't make any sense. And so if I were to take over Star Wars, I would have done like Rogue One in multiple different ways. Like I would have just recognized Star Wars as a universe
Yeah.
and just put people in different parts of that universe that you could experience with them, right?
So
Whatever that
each
might
movie
be.
would have been a standalone?
Maybe not each one. I'm fine with like the show idea or a series of films or something, but they
Yeah.
would be disconnected. It would just happen in the universe of Star Wars rather
Hmm.
than like a new Jedi or something,
Yeah.
or maybe someone who's trying to start his own temple based off of Luke's, or maybe someone who's against Luke, or someone who wants to chase after the Sith or something. Something that kind of
Yeah.
expands the lore that exists already
Mm-hmm.
without necessarily jumping in. And that's the biggest problem I have is that most of these properties are constantly harkening back. Like the thing I had with the sequels, that every single film, all 3 of them, had to have some type of Death Star technology. I was like, dude, something new. Like,
uh,
why does it have to be Death Star technology? And
mm-hmm.
every film and show has to harken back to the original trilogy. It's like, guys, do something new. And the ones that they finally did get away from, like, are just awful, right? You look at
Yeah.
something like The Acolyte or whatever. It's just like,
Oof.
what are you guys doing? Like, this is not. They're harkening back to territory that nobody wants to see. I mean, the High Republic. Anyway, but getting out of all that, like, I think. Yeah, I mean, Star Wars is a very interesting universe, and it would be cool to explore more of it rather than be
Yeah.
so stuck in this timeline.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I think I would have okayed a show. That's it. I would have okayed a show, one,
Depends
and
on what
then
the show is. Yes.
I would have tried to keep that show alive for like multiple seasons and just
Yeah, like
let it
4 or 5 seasons.
go. I would
Yeah.
have accepted a really good premise and then no more. And the reason for that is I don't want to like diminish the quality of the brand.
Right. Exactly.
I can handle a failure ish of a movie, which I wouldn't really say that they would fail because they would be an opinion thing because they'd be by someone who's like a diehard Star Wars fan and they want to
Sure.
do a weird dark take on it or a weird Western take or a weird whatever take. I can live with that if it doesn't meet everybody's taste because I'll just recover with the next mainline Star Wars movie
Sure.
that I'm overseeing. And then we have the backup TV show to buffer some things, and then
Mm.
that can maybe do more of the lore exploring stuff and a little less on the funsies. But
Yeah.
I would have been careful, and because I think that was one of their main problems. And I know we're dragging this out, but it's like it's a larger, more interesting subject. To look at like their treatment of the brand. I think they really destroyed it with a number of different very bad calls.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an argument there that I actually really despise, and
That I made.
no,
Okay.
just in this realm. So
Okay.
it was made for two properties. One was Star Wars, the other one was Marvel. And
Okay.
so the term that they used was fatigue.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. No. When you're looking at these properties, when the quality is consistent, fatigue is, I don't think it's not as likely. Let's call it that. Right? You'll ever after a while you'll be like, all right, I don't need as much of this anymore, right? You can slow it down or something. But they used that term in order to cover up for the fact that what they were putting out was garbage.
Yes.
So that's my problem, is that the consistency of quality does not remain the same.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that, you're not going to have a failure every once in a while, but it was a consistent stream of failures that just kept coming. And it
Right.
was like, guys, why are we not, this is one of the biggest franchises, a multi-billion-dollar franchise.
Right.
Put some care into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even when you see something like Rogue One, and one of the reasons why I have so much respect for it is that despite all of the corporate intervention, enough bled through that it was still a competent
Yes.
and fun film. And I
Yeah.
think that really speaks to how much people enjoyed making it and how passionate they were about the project.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at other things like, some of these shows and whatnot, and it's like, it's not shining through the same way, whether that be because of too much corporate intervention or whether it be because, the passion's not there, or whether it because it's just not an inspired project. There
Yeah.
there has to be some kind of creativity that really like drives that forward, and that's what is at the heart of Star Wars in the first place. That's what created it in the first place.
Yeah.
Same thing with Marvel. There's a lot of charm to Marvel, and you can tell because Stanley was like,
Yeah.
he loved what he did, and he like a lot of that bleeds through. And again, he had so much stuff that you're gonna have all those failures and those things that flop, but like failure's not indicative of poor quality. It's indicative of trying, right?
Yeah.
Because someone who succeeds will have a number of failures under his belt. Like that's not the
Right.
problem. It's a stream. It's like, what is your motivation? Why do so many of these fail? Like, what is it that's leading you down that path? And I think it's indicative of just a bad heart is where we're at now. And so
Yeah.
this was kind of the last, I don't know, vestige of old Star Wars before it started to veer off in this other direction that Disney wanted it to go,
Yeah.
because it didn't hold a standard of quality that it should have.
Right.
And I think it harkens back to, I liked what Lucas had before, is he had those three tiers. He's like something that would be considered canon, something that's kind of like, yeah, this could be canon, it's kind of loosely accepted,
Okay.
and then something that's completely disconnected. And they would label those so that everybody had a place, right? If I wanted to go submit a book, you're like, yeah, that's cool, but it's not going to be canon. Like, you could release it with the Star Wars name, fine, but
Yeah.
you're not going to be accepted within the official lore or whatever. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's a really good way of dealing with it, and I think that was a lot more indicative of Star Wars in general. It's
Yeah.
like everybody's included, everybody can be a fan, everybody can contribute if you want to,
Yeah.
but I get the ultimate say on what is accepted into
Sure.
my property.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, and these are all like larger discussions, because like fatigue, I think, is a really poor example. I think it's just bad quality is the problem with a lot of these.
Yeah. I think their issue was not so much fatigue as it was just lack of quality. I think impatience too. It just seemed like
Yeah, they were so ready to get as much out the window as possible. It's like, dude, just
and
we
they
were
just
cool
fed
with one
nothing.
movie a year. That sounded awesome.
That sounded more than enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you look comparing again with games as well, and one of the big criticisms that was being thrown at Call of Duty for a while is that they were doing like a game a year, if not two. And it was getting to the point where people were just like, I just don't even really care. I mean, it still had its
Some of us
base
couldn't
that bought
keep
'em.
up. We're
Yeah,
like,
nobody could keep
can't
up.
even finish the game before the
Right.
next one came out.
And what was it? Gears 5 came out, and that game actually went over really, really well. The fourth one I think came out okay as far as I know, but the fifth one I think did especially well because they were like released at like 3-year intervals. So you had this, and then they did like new ideas with it, new characters. Gears 5, I think it's like a very different open level structure. I still got to try that one. I haven't played it myself, but I remember and like when it coming up and people talking about it and being like, "Wow, this is so refreshing." And it's like it's refreshing because you gave it some time to bake.
Right.
You took, you gave it yourself room to explore new ideas. No one's burnt out from the brand. So now you've earned that trust back,
Sure.
right?
You're going to get quality rather than quantity.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately where this started to go after some of these. It's just now it's just getting flooded. You're just like fire hosing, and it's like I don't know which one to grab. And every time I grab something, it's gross. And
and they've really done the same thing to the Marvel brand as well at this point. This like focus on shows was just like intensifying the problem of bad quality because like when you're doing a movie of this caliber, and I know like Star Wars, a lot of them are pretty bad, but like with the Marvel, that wasn't so much the case. Like, there's definitely a lot of them that are not very good, but there's also a lot of them that were still appealing to their base and capturing them. Most Marvel movies were satisfying for Marvel fans, and that's important that they maintained that level of they did have a standard. It oftentimes was not like your or my standard, but it was definitely their basis standard, and so it's kind of maintained its course through that. So yeah,
I will
weathered
say,
the storm.
Thankfully, Star Wars is not. I mean, it's gone a direction that I don't necessarily care for, but it hasn't gone in the direction where like Marvel has that thing where they have the series of films, but at some point you have to watch some of the shows to understand what happens in the film. So now they kind of like deviate.
Yeah.
And this stream becomes like it's got these branches that you've got to follow too.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars doesn't do that, thankfully, because I've never liked that either. I want to follow a single. If I'm watching the films, I'm watching the films, right? I don't want to go read a book to understand the next film. I want to watch one film and then see the sequel and so on. And so I was really excited to know that, and like we share a birthday in December, and it was it was fun to like, that's when they were releasing. So we'd go out every December, and like that was just the birthday thing. We'd get a bunch of friends go and see a Star Wars film. Yeah. Now that's gone just because of all the bad decisions that they have made to get to this point.
Yeah.
But Rogue One, I think, was the last one we saw that way. Because then Last Jedi happened and Solo, and I was like, no more. We're not. And then they just stopped making movies anyway. Like they stopped releasing them. But yeah, I think Rogue One was the last vestige of fun Star Wars.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
We should review Solo at some point.
You're the one
that'll
that
be like
hates
a
that
2-hour
idea so much.
2-hour conversation.
Good
It'll be
Lord.
longer than the movie.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to gear myself up to watch that one again. Sheesh.
Oh, it's an insufferable movie. That's your preview.
Yeah, there you go. Foreshadowing again. Anyway, any last thoughts?
No, it's
good to go. Cool. Well, thank you for joining us again. The HolmFront to hear our further thoughts about Star Wars again. Going super long. So thank you for joining and bearing with us. Good night.